Your doctor is great at keeping you from dying, but he's terrible at helping you living well. This is not my quote. This is coming from a medical doctor himself, Peter Attia, to name the great one. But I also came into the experience myself with dealing with the medical system some time back and being failed. Because, yes, they are very good at making sure you're not falling falling overboard. But when it comes to like optimizing your performance and operating at your best, they're not always, not all of them, but most of them, not always your best bet. And especially when it comes to blood work, because that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, because your doctor is most likely not testing you for some of the most important markers to help you feel energetic, to help you feel vital, and especially to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. Because if you've ever done, which you hopefully did at some point, a blood work test, a checkup, anything like that, you probably got the basic panel, and like you have everything a little bit in there with LDL cholesterol, with blood glucose, HbA1c, inflammation markers. Like these are all fine, but there are multiple markers that are not yet, first of all, acknowledged as relevant, as highly relevant. And we have actually new markers that are independently the most reliable marker for assessing cardiovascular risk, which would be ApoB in this situation. Your doctor doesn't test you for ApoB. LDL cholesterol can almost be irrelevant for your situation, but your ApoB is what really matters. And another example of that will be, for example, testosterone. Most doctors actually don't test you for your testosterone, while it is the most crucial marker when it comes to your drive, vitality, and overall quality of life. Like obviously, especially for men, the man's sex hormone, it is responsible to make you feel energetic, make you feel driven, and make you feel like you're on your purpose. And especially seeing, like all the data and the studies showing that our testosterone over the last years, half century, have declined. Essentially, our 30-year-olds today have the testosterone of our 70-year-olds 50 years ago is very alarming. And I'm still trying to figure out why it's not like a standard marker that is done in every checkup, especially if you're a man above 40. I have my members test themselves with the panel that I give them. And obviously testosterone in there is included. But we had quite a few pushbacks from doctors, some even saying like, I'm not willing to test you for that. I don't know 100% the answer because they couldn't, after asking them, like they couldn't give them really the answer. That was more a little bit of a I don't know what you say, like just like some stubborn behavior to some degree. There could be multiple reasons why that is. What I could imagine theoretically is there is some sort of interest when it comes to insurances, because medical system and what is being taught and being instructed to the doctors is heavily influenced by the insurance industry. And or maybe if let's say that's not true, maybe that's just whatever you want to call it, aluminium hat conspiracy theory. It could just be that they're really not educated and don't know like how actually important it is. Because yes, medical doctors, they have to learn a lot. They have to know a lot of things. But it's also difficult to know everything about the human body. And through my own personal experience and having been failed by the Swiss medical system, having to go on my own path essentially to fixing it, and today luckily having everything fixed, I invested a lot of money, like over 6 figures in the whole process. Like obviously it involves also like human performance, nutrition, training, all of that. But a big part of that was also like in working with some of the best and most credible people in this space when it comes to human optimization. Part of that is also your testosterone, your blood work, your health markers, and how they actually influence your body. What I'm going to share with you in this episode right now is the actual blood work panel that I do for myself, that I give my clients, and that is essentially condensed information from working, like I said, with some of the top experts in this world and condensed information. Just to name a few, not that I didn't work with all of them one-on-one directly, but essentially these are the recommendations that come from the top world experts. Like I said in the beginning, Dr. Peter Attia, Dr. Huberman, Dr. Mike Israetel, Broderick Chavez, which is a coach to Olympic athletes and obviously is focused on performance, Dr. Andy Galpin, which are all specialized in human performance, that will probably know a thing or two more and have worked with a few more people than maybe your average doctor has. Because like I said, your doctors may be great at keeping you from dying, but is terrible at making you live well. And I'll give you access. I'll show you the full blood panel. What you have to do if you haven't done so, if your last test has been over a year, get the copy of it, go to your doctor, get yourself tested for that. And if you want, so even you can reach out to my socials if you want to have my opinion, maybe looking over that. Like I said, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not here to give medical advice, but through personal experience and a lot of financial investment, learning from the top world's experts, I wanted to and had to, out of forced situation, learn a little bit about that. If you don't know my story when it comes to like where the Smith's medical system has failed me, and I've been through multiple doctors, endocrinologists, and they couldn't figure out what the problem was. I, in the end, had to go my own way and start exploring that and working with people that were able to help me, that knew the topic a little bit better. I have a full video on that on my YouTube channel. If you go to Robin Keller and you type in "I'm coming out," this is essentially the full story where I show my whole blood work, how the doctors and the endocrinologists reacted to it, and what I needed to do to essentially fix my health, performance, my testosterone, and ultimately what most likely is the reason why I'm still here today. Not to be overly dramatic, but it went that far. So let's get right into it. Let me share my screen here and have you look at the blood work panel that we have right here. So like I said, this is condensed information. This is what I have my clients do essentially. So generally what you want to do, like I said, if your last blood test has been over a year ago, you want to get that done as soon as possible because there might have been markers that you have not been tested for yet. If your LDL cholesterol is high, there's maybe another marker that I'm going to show you that is maybe a little bit more relevant. So in general, if for a panel like that, you want to get tested, generally do the test. Most doctors will do that with you anyways. Get tested and fasted before 9 a.m. because especially for your hormonal health, this is where you want to be tested because testosterone in this example peaks in the morning. And this is kind of the standardized process how you go. If possible, no training caffeines or supplements before the test, especially in the morning, obviously. And ideally, it's not always necessary, but you can also do it after a rest day. So meaning if you're training regularly and if you, let's say, especially if you do high intensity things, if you had a very hard workout the day before, it can be that your inflammation markers are a little bit higher than usual. I personally, I don't care about it because I'm not going to like change my routine or lifestyle just because of a blood test. I know where my levels are roughly, and any deviation from that, I know how to interpret that. So starting off right away with the hormonal profile, which a lot of men have not tested yet, or your doctors may be not testing you for. So obviously, total testosterone in here. So what you see here with the nose is preferably LCMS if available. Most doctors don't have access to that. There's essentially two types of measurements that you can do, or two machineries that you can use. One is called an immunoassay, and the other one is an LCMS. Immunoassays is kind of like the standard, which you find everywhere. It works, but it's not the most accurate. Everything that you measure with an immunoassay and that has a relative low particle count, or just like is a low amount in your blood, it just becomes very difficult. Imagine you're trying to weigh, like a traditional kitchen scale, like the old school ones where you have like a spring inside and, like a dial. And it shows you, like you're like, oh, is it like 150 grams? Is it 140 grams? You're not sure. You're kind of using that, but for grams or maybe even micrograms. So it becomes a little bit blurry. The numbers are not as accurate because the exact number that you're going to have on your blood test usually are more indicators and not hard facts. That's why it's really important that you also get your blood work analyzed by somebody who knows what they're doing. So obviously we want to have, if you have access, ask your doctor if they can do an LCMS. You want to have total testosterone, free testosterone. preferably calculated, because if you don't have an LCMS and you want to measure it, free testosterone measuring with immunoassay is very, very difficult, because it's such a small count in your body that it's going to be more inaccurate than accurate. So there's two ways you can measure it, or you can calculate it via SHBG and albumin. That's why we're going to put it in there. Albumin is also like relevant for others. It's like one of the most relevant overall health markers that you want to have tested. You will see, I'm not going to go over the reference ranges because that will drag the whole thing way too far out, but albumin should definitely be, it's like an overall health marker. If your albumin is in range, it's already like a good sign, right? So total testosterone free, SHBG, albumin, and then also estradiol. If possible, also sensitive LCMS. If not possible, then it is what it is. But estradiol, or it will show up on your blood test as estradiol or as E2, is essentially your estrogen. And it's important to know what that is, especially comparing, because you want to have a good testosterone to estrogen ratio. There is something called, a lot of men suffer from low testosterone, actually, which is not necessarily due to whatever, the toxicity of our environment. Is just because they're too fat. Like, sorry to break the news to you, but if you're carrying too much body fat, in your body fat, you have something that is called aromatase. And aromatase essentially is an enzyme that converts testosterone into estrogen. So the more body fat you have, the more of this aromatase enzyme you have. So it takes your body produces enough testosterone, but it converts it into estrogen. So your balance get out of sight. You have higher estrogen, you have lower testosterone. And in your blood test, it seems like you're low T. In certain situations, you can even call that you will call that an obesity-induced hypogonadism. And hypogonadism is essentially when you have too little testosterone in your system. So high testosterone, relatively low estrogen, or in-range estrogen is preferably. If your estrogen is too high, high estrogen essentially shows up in irritability, bad decision-making. I felt that firsthand myself. And just imagine, like, with all the love to women, remember when your woman is at her craziest, usually it happens before the period, when they still have the period, if, like, depends on how old she is. When they get a little bit crazy, that's when their estrogen increases, and that's when they get a little bit crazy. And that's kind of like what happens to you too if you're overweight and carrying too much body fat. You have too much estrogen, too little testosterone, and your mind goes a little bit crazy. You're falling out of your masculine energy. You become irritable, and it's just not what we want to all have. I'm not going to go over every single marker because otherwise it's going to take way too long. These are all important for assessing your overall. They're not directly relevant, but for example, if your testosterone is maybe low, you also look at LH and FSH. Prolactin is an important marker. DHEA also. IGF-1 essentially means is about your growth hormone. How well is your growth hormone production? Because IGF-1 is responsible for recovery, for muscle growth, for muscle maintenance, and lots of other processes in the body. You also want to have cortisol to see if you're chronically stressed or having like if your cortisol is too high. That can fluctuate, obviously, but that kind of covers the hormonal aspect. You also want to have a look at your thyroid panel. Most doctors test that usually. So just your TSH and your free T and T4. This will give you insight how well your thyroid is functioning, essentially, like how well is your metabolism working. Usually, not this is the problem that this drives down. All your lifestyle choices are showing then in these markers. So interpretation of these markers is really important, that you have somebody that actually understands human biology, so they don't blame the wrong reason for that, and you're not trying to like medicate yourself where the reason is completely somewhere else. Because most situations, if it's your blood glucose is too high, your cholesterol is too high, like, yes, medication can temporarily help, but in the long run, obviously you're going to be much healthier to help your body optimize these markers, which will optimize your body essentially. Thyroid panel, then also for cardiovascular, an inflammation marker. Obviously, we still want to have total cholesterol because It's an important marker for all the assessment of the lipid panel. HDL and LDL. LDL is usually the most typical one, which doctors refer to your cardiovascular health, which is not bad, but also not great. Sometimes they also include very low density VLDL, which can give a little bit better insights than the LDL. Triglycerides is also like a very important marker. This is your total fat particle count, how much fat is circulating in your blood, essentially. But the big one that is really, really, really important, like probably to assess your cardiovascular risk, is the single most important marker right here, is your ApoB, your apolipoprotein B. Actually, it's been probably around for 5 years, have proven that this is the single most important marker to assess your cardiovascular risk. You can almost, not entirely, but you could almost cut out all other markers to assess your cardiovascular risk and only bet on ApoB, because that's the one that really, really, really matters. Just make sure you get that tested. It's very easy to test, but your doctor probably might not test you for that, because you have to imagine medical half-life. This is a crazy fact. Medical half-life, the knowledge of medicine in a doctor has a half-life, meaning after this time, the time frame, the knowledge has halved or has been updated. So 50% of it is not relevant anymore. Medical half-life has between depending on the topic, 2 to 4 years. So after 2 to 4 years, half of the knowledge is outdated. So that's why it's really, really important that any medical professional you're seeing up is consistently educating themselves and being up to date with the science. Imagine your doctor has been now practicing for 20 years. You can do the math on yourself, like how much percent of that is then left over. And then also at the same time, what your doctor maybe has learned in medical school. If these findings today, let's say ApoB has been found out today that this is the most relevant marker for your cardiovascular health. Today, it will take years until it's acknowledged by the international associations and also communicated that way. It will take probably 10 years until it's even in the books. And these are the books that your doctor is then going to release. And then he learns that in his studies, and he probably graduates, I don't know how long doctors take in their studies, but let's say 5 years. By then, it's almost outdated again, right? So it's really, really important that whoever you have as your medical professional keeps up to date with the relevant science. ApoB, get it in your blood test. Also, lipoprotein A, optional, like I said, but recommended to have it done at least once. Highly sensitivity C-reactive protein, and also the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. Also comes from the CBC, which stands for complete blood count. Like I said, I'm not going to go over every single marker, just the ones that are usually not tested enough and that you have. You will have access to this document. I'll give you that access down below. No, you don't need to submit your email. You don't need to have anything. Just get a copy of it and bring it to your doctor next time when you say you want to be tested for that, and see where you land. Now to the second page, you also want to have obviously metabolic and insulin sensitivity. This is probably already tested by your doctor. Fasting glucose, HbA1c, fasting insulin, very standard usually in your test inside. You also want to have a look at certain nutrients that are important. For example, vitamin D. Most doctors usually test vitamin D. Also has a direct impact on your testosterone production, and probably almost everybody, especially if you live in Central Europe, Switzerland, will have low vitamin D during the winters because they don't get enough sun. You cannot get enough sun in winter to synthesize vitamin D, even if you would be in the sun. The sun is just not strong enough for you to synthesize that. So supplementation is pretty much required to get yourself into healthy vitamin D levels. And also it's a direct in the cascade, essentially, of testosterone production. So very, very important. B12 too, because over 50% of adults above 40 have usually vitamin B12 deficiencies, and it's also directly impacting your energy levels and cognitive performance. Omega-3 index, very, very, very important. Also adds to the fact of heart health, brain health. I say optional here, but honestly, I test it. The thing is, you don't have to test that every time. If you're supplementing with omega-3, Generally, you probably should start around like 1,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA combined. And if you know, like, okay, you're in the range between like 8 to 12% of omega-3, if you just maintain that, you probably don't have to worry about that marker again, unless there is something else in your blood work that shows up. So the thing is, like, with these blood markers, you can not only look at single markers, you always have to look at them in a holistic way. That's why it's important to include all of them, right? Folate, ferritin, important. A full iron panel to also see your iron status. And then also a few markers here for your organ and health safety. This is essentially like your liver markers, your kidney markers, creatinine, just to see if everything else in your body is functioning well, because with these markers, we'll be able to tell that. Also, CBC, here's a complete blood count, actually. How, like things such as your hematocrit, your hemoglobin, your red blood cell count, your white blood cell count is doing. One of an interesting markers that for me once stood out was the hematocrit, and it was elevated. And I actually, and my coach, which is a medical professional also, and I learned a lot from him too, he looked at my blood work and he said, like, your hematocrit is elevated, which is one of two things. Either you're dehydrated or you snore. I was like, okay, I'm probably like hydrated enough because I take well care of that. And, but snoring, I don't know. I asked my girlfriend at that time, ex-girlfriend, if she noticed if I'm snoring, but she never really, because she sleeps very deep, so she couldn't really tell. And I actually have a full video also on my YouTube channel where I discovered my sleep apnea. It was a hypoapnea. It was not a full apnea. Hypoapnea means like I get a little bit too little breath. That's why I snore a little bit, and that's why I have a little bit of elevated hematocrit. Did a full video on that. But usually also it comes from elevated body weight. And in my situation, also on top of that, location or environmental based allergies, which just close my nose and then cause me to snore and then essentially show up in hematocrit. But it's a funny thing to see, like, oh, you can see in your blood work if you're snoring, essentially. But only obviously if you have a professional that knows what the blood work means. If you're snoring or if you have a higher body weight, it's worth looking at sleep optimization and snoring techniques. But have a look at this video. I share what worked for me, what I have done. If you go on my channel again, Robin Keller, sleep apnea, you'll find that. And there's a lot of other markers here too. Like I said, not going to go into every single one, but important to test too. And then the last one on this list here to make this list complete is male specific marker. Obviously, your girl or your woman doesn't need to do that. PSA, prostate specific antigen, especially for men over 45, or if symptoms are present, will give you an insight into how your prostate is doing. Usually also done in most situations. But the thing is, some doctors test for this, some doctors test for that. They've just been doing the same and same over and over again without actually questioning the panel that they're doing. And that's why I condensed information and advice from some of the brightest minds when it comes to human performance and human optimization. And this is not only for athletes, this is literally for people who just want to live a great life, feel good in their skin, and operate at a high level. And if you're a high performer, like, high performance doesn't start only in the boardroom and in the office. Like, it starts in your bedroom. It starts in your kitchen. It shows up in your blood work. And that's exactly why we can take regular blood works and have these tested. You would have no idea how many clients and members in my program I had where we discovered, like, in one situation, actually, like, very, very critical markers. Like, I'll just tell you this one example. I had a guy, he was looking to lose somewhere between 10 to 15 kilos initially. And his doctor only tested him for like the basic things. So his LDL was lightly elevated. But it seemed like his doctor was like, it looks okay. And I was like, okay, look, I want to be in the full picture. It seems okay, but just get that tested. So shortly after he got it tested, his ApoB came back, and his ApoB was critically high. It translated means he's at an increased risk of a heart attack within the next 10 years, essentially. And that allowed us to dive right into optimization protocols when it comes to nutrition, training, supplementation, to optimize his blood lipids to a degree so it will decrease his risk of having a heart attack, essentially. And if we would have not done that, he might have suffered in the next 10 years from a heart attack, which is crazy to think for somebody that just turned 40. Could you imagine? So that's why I'm not saying this because I want to be some, like the next guru and like fear mongering and everything. This can, at some point, this can decide if you're feeling good, feeling bad. This can decide if you're performing okay or performing great. And in some situations, this can decide if you're living to 60 or until 80, which is quite an important thing to look at if your life is something worth to you, which I guess all of us is for. So again, you can get access to the panel down below in the show description. Don't please try to request access to the document. Just make a copy of it. I'll actually make a copy directly so you can just have a copy of it. If you want to know how we do that, or if you do the blood test, you get it back and you're not sure if your doctor has the full overview, if he only looks you for, the markers that would like, the markers that are not essentially only for keeping you from dying, but also like help you live well. Feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm always happy to like give my 2 cents on it, either on LinkedIn, Robin Keller, or on Instagram, also at Robin Keller Official. And details are also down in the description if you want to know how we take all of that, because I know I talked a lot. There's a lot of markers. There's a lot to like understand, context, the matrix of the whole thing, and how you can actually like take that, apply it, and only get the tactical implementations from your blood work to optimize, to increase your performance, energy, vitality, body composition, essentially your quality of life. If you want to know, if you don't want to have to deal with that all yourself and you want to have somebody that guides you through that process and like cuts out the bullshit, no guesswork, and tells you exactly what to do in order to get that, you can have a look down below. I'll share with you the website where I walk you through the exact 4-phase transformation system that we used, where we already transformed hundreds of high-performing men, helped them drop anywhere from 15 to 20, in some cases even 25 kilos of body fat, improve their health markers across the board, including testosterone, helping them feel their absolute best in decades. We have multiple guys saying they feel better at 50 than they felt at 25, which is insane when you think about it. And yeah, like essentially like the whole process, you can find it down below, thefithighperformer.com/code. Everything is down below in the description, including the blood marker. This is your call to action. Get yourself tested. Talk to your doctor and make sure your health is optimized. And to quote Dr. Peter Attia again, medicine is great at keeping you from dying, but it's terrible at helping you living well.